What was the first step?
For moving to on-prem. The biggest mistake you can make when it comes to on-prem or hosting options for your customer is letting your engineers decide how it should be built, because it's not an engineering problem. It extends so far beyond engineering. So the first thing was figuring out what was really practical for us. What was the support model that would work? So that meant working with those customers, sharing with them, here are the actual limitations. We are going to need temporary access at times to provide support, or for, a higher fee, we can send people on site. I think a lot of times we're almost going back in time when we think about these offerings. And so we had to come up with what was going to work with that model. Once we had that, then we were able to move forward to next steps.
Welcome to One Idea. Today I'm joined by Gil Feig, CTO and co-founder at Merge. Welcome, Gil.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to chat today.
Perfect. So on-prem, I think that probably is one of the most difficult thing to accomplish, especially for a startup. Let's start with why. Why on-prem? Why did enterprises start asking for it?
What's funny is you can almost think of on-prem as a reversal of technology where, everyone was afraid of cloud and it was all new and no one knew how to use it. And then it was futuristic and you wanted to be cloud, and Salesforce, pioneered the way and everyone looked up to them, and Dropbox and all of that. And I think what you saw was there was still some lack of trust, but people got comfortable with it anyway, essentially saying, I'm going to put all of my data and all of my workload in public cloud and take on the risks that, come along with that. But ultimately, some companies never got comfortable with that. And now recently we've started to see a reversal where a lot of companies are saying, no, I want all my data and all processing to be stored and processed at rest, in transit, in my infrastructure, whether that's, in a closet that we have that has servers, or, in some form of public cloud, but one that we control ourselves, so that our vendor doesn't have access to any of our data.
And let's probably define what exactly is on-prem, right? So on-prem is VPC inside public cloud or really data center?
So it's funny because on-prem, what it actually means is really, you're running in your own data centers, other terms like bare metal, you're running on your own infrastructure. I think these days, though, people use it a little fast and loose, and they'll use on-prem to refer to basically any form of hosting that's not the vendor hosting it in their, cloud infrastructure.
So the first challenge then is making sure you know what is required to be on-prem, right? And why is answered already. So now, what are the first few things that you thought customers really asked for? And what exactly did they really want on-prem?
So I think, we get on calls with companies, and what Merge does, we're an integration provider. So we move a lot of data for Fortune 500s, big banks, and it has a lot of PII in it. And so we would get on calls with customers and they would ask about security. It would start, of course, with we have SOC 2 Type 2 and we have ISO 27001 and GDPR and HIPAA and every other acronym you can think of. And unfortunately, I think when we got to, a certain part of the market, especially up market, especially selling into banks, that's just not enough, because it doesn't matter what security you have, what you have in place. You are their weakest point of security, if anything happens to you. And so we started seeing companies saying, no, we want to host this in our own data centers. For the banks, that actually meant, floor 2 of our New York City office where we have a bunch of servers. And then for some other tech companies, some AI companies, that meant, no, we want you to host in our public cloud, but you can't retain any access to it. And ultimately, I think what we honed in on was more, they just care about security. They care about data at rest and in transit, not being accessible to any other vendor.
Was the expectation that your engineers will not have access to the logs and metrics? Or was it that they will at least get some access so they can debug some of these issues? Because startups generally, the first version of the software is by design supposed to break.
Yes.
And you would want access to it.
Yeah.
How did you get over that fear?
I think that is a huge problem. You have to retain access to logs and metrics if you want to provide any form of support. And when we were thinking about offering this in the first place, we talked to, former execs and current execs at, Databricks and at Dropbox and at just every big company you can think of. And we got repeatedly warned, do not offer on-prem, not because you can't run on their infrastructure, but because of support, because it becomes such a burden, especially for a startup, that there's not really a good amount of money that can make it worth it for your business. But obviously we didn't take their advice fully. So we did end up moving in that direction. It's definitely a big pain. We because we knew about all of the support costs and everything that would come along with it, a compromise we made with everyone on-prem was we need the ability to at least funnel anonymized logs and metrics back to ourselves. So we do get that fed across. We use a variety of tech for that, but essentially the logs get streamed to us as well as any alerts. They still notify us. Once we get alerted, that's where then we have to kick off a process to get access to the environment, though. It's not, we don't just have immediate access.
That's when you have access to it.
Yeah, we have access. So basically, if an alert goes off or if we're starting to see a crazy amount of logs popping up, that's where we're then, we'll reach out to the team. We'll say, hey, there's an alert going on. We want to investigate with your team. They can either choose to hop on and screen share with us, which is really painful, or they'll grant us temporary access to the environment.
And the PII aspect then is completely addressed with this, as long as you do not have any data coming out other than the logs.
Yeah.
At least the PII part is like completely addressed.
The PII part is completely addressed. There obviously is that moment in time when we're granted temporary access to the environment to investigate. So we try to restrict, ramp down the number of permissions we're asking for. But ultimately, unless you're doing true, on-prem, there's nothing you can do to support people. There's always going to have to be some form of compromise of at least temporary access.
Generally, I'm thinking from a technology standpoint, does the language even matter at this point? Because I don't think it matters, right?
So I think there's one piece that matters, and we ran into it, which is compiled versus non-compiled languages. So we use Python, and that's tough for an on-prem deploy because their team can just go log into that server, SSH in, and see all the code right there. And so part of it is contractual. Hey, you're not allowed to look at our code. You're not allowed to repurpose it. And then the other thing we did was we use Cython, which compiles down Python to like a sort of bytecode intermediate state. It can be sort of decompiled back to Python using AI and using a bunch of tools. But it's more, I think, when we combine contractual obligations with a bit of trust with this sort of partial compilation, we're comfortable at that point. But of course, we wish our code was in Java or, something else that we could just compile it down and not have to worry.
You can probably obfuscate it a little bit too, if required. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we do with Cython. There's a bit of obfuscation, there's a bit of this partial compilation, but ultimately, if someone wants to figure it out, especially with AI these days, like they're gonna find their way.
Now let's talk about the baby steps to get there. Right? What was the first step?
For moving to on-prem?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I think like one thing just to repeat again, when I say on-prem, I really refer to us offering sort of a VPC offering, where we offer it to our customers. And how it looked was essentially more and more requests for it, thinking of intermediate states. What can we do? Because we're happy to we could easily build this thing to run in our customers' infrastructure, but we can't support it. And our software is very complex. I think we use like 16 or 18 AWS services. We have a lot of data syncing. We're running thousands of servers at a time, sometimes for one individual customer. And so to build something like that can really run on-prem, we had to think about our support model first and foremost. So I coined this phrase that I always said to our team, which is like the biggest mistake you can make when it comes to on-prem or hosting options for your customer is letting your engineers decide how it should be built, because it's not an engineering problem. Of course, there is that piece of how do we get this up and running, but more so, how do we support it? How do we deal with this contractually? How do we build a communication model between our teams? It extends so far beyond engineering. So the first thing was figuring out what was really practical for us. What was the support model that would work? So that meant working with those customers, sharing with them, here are the actual limitations. We are going to need temporary access at times to provide support, or for, a higher fee, we can send people on site. I think a lot of times we're almost going back in time when we think about these offerings. And so we had to come up with what was going to work with that model. Once we had that, then we were able to move forward to next steps.
So what was the first automation? Did you complete everything with discovery and just manual scripted steps in between, and then converted everything to automation? What was the process there?
Yeah, so we had to inventory everything we have, all the services we use, how they work, what they depend on. And I think what we found was like certain services were running on AWS base images that weren't available elsewhere. So we had to really start thinking about the flexibility, what could be ripped out. It was a big scoping exercise. I would say it probably took like 1 to 2 weeks just to figure out where we could start with thinking about moving to either other hosting providers or even how we could replicate this to run in someone's infrastructure that's on AWS like we are.
When you decided to deploy on-prem, right? Was there any re-architecture, or did you look at a component and say, you know what? I don't think this can never go on-prem.
Yeah. I think we thought about we definitely did re-architect some things, but timelines were important here, and we didn't have the time to go rebuild a lot. So things like Cython were a great compromise. This came a little bit later in our discovery journey, but instead of saying, all right, we're gonna rewrite some of this really important code or spend a ton of time on an obfuscation layer, Cython exists, and we can just add that to our CI/CD pipeline, and our artifacts themselves that are spit out are compiled Cython. So that was an example. I think there were certain things like we had to think about moving to more of a push model to our database. So it was sort of like a one-way communication versus opening transactions and reading and then writing back. That involved, converting some of our queuing logic over to Kafka. There was definitely some converting that we had to do to make sure that this was going to scale and work well. And then on the other hand, we said like, this is how many weeks we have to do this conversion. What compromises are we going to make? And some of those meant, hey, we can't convert everything to be, off AWS and AWS agnostic. Like we have some services that heavily depend on it. And for our initial set of customers, we're going to need to tell them that one limitation is while we can run this in your infrastructure, that infrastructure needs to be on AWS. And how can we word this in a way to our customers that shows that it still meets their needs, right? This has to run in AWS, but it satisfies your security requirements. And then all you have to do is just open, a single IP or single port to your infrastructure that's running in whatever other host you want, and then all of your requirements are met.
You are managing my environment, so now it's yours.
Exactly. It's sort of in a way of like, hey, we are gonna deploy this to AWS for you, and you own the AWS deployment. So technically, it's running in your VPC, even if you as a company are not an AWS user.
And who is paying the infrastructure cost here?
Our customer. So generally, the customer takes that on, which also makes you rethink your pricing model.
Yeah, that's one thing that I probably see as a decision that would favor this move as generally usage is something you can probably change your pricing and get away with.
Yeah, and it's actually really tough as a business too, because as someone or as a lot of businesses these days are usage based, how do you reprice to actually grow that contract when your volume, your cost is no longer metric or sort of usage based, because they're directly paying all the infra costs. For us, there's still more support when we have more connections. For us, our customers connect their customers' integrations, and a lot of times there's needs for customization or support in onboarding and getting security access and all. So we support with all of that, which still gives us the ability to bill on usage. But yeah, that was a challenge.
And for that whole transition, how long did the whole transition take? Right from the moment you realized it's required to the moment you said, you know what, it's done, dusted.
Yeah. Our first deployment from basically the time we started actually building it to the time it was live in our customer's instance was about 18 weeks. So long. It was about 4 months or so. There was a lot of custom work to be done. Even, things like grant us access as needed. That's not an easy thing because you need a joint approval system. You need time-bound access to revoke that access. So all of that is custom, and that's the approach we went with. And yeah, it took about 18 weeks. Now we're a lot faster because we have the reps under our belt. We built a lot of scripts, that sort of thing.
Is it at a one-click deploy state now?
No, it's not a one-click deploy. Like we still have a little bit of Terraform drift. We still have a little bit of customization per customer. They might not want to use the same approval system as other customers. So we're not quite there yet as badly as we'd like to be.
So are you seeing that as an end goal, or I think right now what you have must be good enough?
I think so 18 weeks is not good enough. I think like getting to a 2 to 4 week setup is something that's good enough for us. We want to get down to there. I would say right now we're at like 4 to 6 weeks to get them up and running. We want to get down to around 2. Once we're there, that's easy for us to tell customers, hey, you can get up and running. You can just test using our multi-tenant while you build it out, and then you'll just swap over the URL to your on-prem when the time is right, after these 2 weeks.
Metrics versus log. What was super important in this case, right? Was it logs more important or metrics?
Logs. We care a little bit less about metrics. Also, to be fair, like we can view metrics when we get access to provide support. So again, this is more of what we offer is more of a hybrid VPC or what we call a managed VPC. So we do have the ability to see usage. That's all important, but most important to us is uptime. We want to provide a really available service, especially for our customers who need on-prem and pay us for it. And so that means logs are really critical for us. We need to be seeing as soon as anything starts going wrong, log in there, add more resources, reduce resources, fix bugs, like do whatever it is.
So the most of the problems that you have seen so far, was it code related, infrastructure related, or config related?
I would say probably generally it's going to be infra related, notably again because of the sheer depth of what we run. It's like we're not this complex, and I don't have an ego to think that we're the same as this, but it's kind of like asking Meta to run on-prem. Like it's just been built for so many years with this idea of like we'll never offer it to someone to run in their own infrastructure. There's so many services and so many things tied together that at the point you decide years down the road, like, hey, let's go make this run in someone else's infrastructure. You're not, you weren't thinking at the time that you were like, oh, our SREs will get involved if something, if something goes wrong. That's how you built it. And so now when you're like, no, we won't have SREs and this thing needs to patch and manage itself if anything ever goes wrong, it's a tough problem. So for us, we kind of had to find that right balance, and know that we were still going to need to involve people.
Got it. So Gil, in your team right now, do you have like support versus engineering versus like on call teams, right? How do you design your teams for this?
Yeah. So, like, candidly, how often does something happen where we need to log into one of these boxes? Still pretty rarely, right? Like, if we had to do this every day, that would be a big problem for both us and our customers. I would say maybe like once every couple weeks, someone is getting hot and we'll have to go in and add some more resources. But we do have, so what we did was we split out and we now have two on calls. And one of them is like our traditional on call for bugs and for net new sort of like customer asks that are quick. We call it reactive work. And then I would say we have this other on-call queue that is for customer deployments. So that's alerting separately, and they see immediately if something is going wrong. They get paged if one of our on-prem customers goes down, that sort of thing.
What are the guidelines for alerting here?
Yeah, so we do a few things. So we have anomaly detection first and foremost. We want to see if, for us, like one of our golden metrics is syncs that are currently running because we're syncing data across. We do a lot of ETLs of this data into our customer SaaS or AI systems. And so if we see a drop in the number of syncs that are running at any one moment, it's a good indicator for us. We monitor for that. We monitor obviously for all the classic CPU and load and database and all of that. But generally we have our few, number of things that are running, number of new connections that are being established, all of those. If we see anomalies there, that's a sign to us to go in and investigate.
Basically, outliers generally are a good indicator for us. Do you have lead indicators for this, or when an alert happens, you'll just jump in and fix it?
Yeah, so we have another one. So we have a service that's our scheduler, and that's what actually like says like adds all the things to a queue to be run. We are actually at the baseline monitoring how many it's scheduling. So there's like sort of how many jobs are being scheduled, how many are currently in the queue, and then how many are actively running. So the number being scheduled is a really important number for us. That tells us ahead of time. Just has a few more false positives, just because like we sometimes have bursty schedules. So
Do you do non-incident based alerts slash notifications to customers? In one thing I can think of is maybe they are providing more resources than you need, and there's an opportunity for you to optimize. Do you let them? Do you have that notification mechanism too?
we don't currently have that because we do have auto scaling down. Auto scaling down is actually a lot easier for us than auto scaling up
And why so?
because we have bursty traffic and sometimes it'll overscale, it'll over provision. So like, an example here might be we have an integration and it has one really long sync that runs. Okay. But that one sync then might kick off 1,000 subtasks all at once, each to sync a different page. And so we go from having a queue length of one to having a queue length of 1,000 in one. So then we split into multiple queues, and that works. But just more, there's a lot of patterns when it comes to these syncs, especially because every platform we sync with is completely different. And so sometimes we do have bursts that we actually do want to add a lot more resources and sometimes not. We figured out a lot of them. And I would say like, again, 95% of the time it's working perfectly. Occasionally though, you'll see like a burst of scale. And we're actually okay letting it add 50 new nodes really quickly. That's fine. But if it tries to add 1,000 new nodes, that's a problem. It might be valid. It's likely not. So that's where we then might get alerted and have to go step in there. Or also a reason why we'll say to customers like, hey, we would rather not allow like uncapped auto scaling here.
And since we are on the auto scaling topic, right? So from a technology standpoint, just going a little deeper, so are you using something like standard Kubernetes or something similar?
Yeah, we use Kubernetes and we use Carpenter for helping with the auto scaling.
The node auto scaling.
Yeah.
Got it. You have node groups and
Node groups, we have node auto scaling, and we have HPA as well.
from Kubernetes
Yeah,
standpoint.
from Kubernetes.
And the metric for HPA typically is the resource metrics.
Resource metrics.
Are these all stateful computes or stateless or a combination?
It's a combination, I believe. I don't directly work on all of this, but it's a combination. I think mostly stateless though.
That's a huge advantage. Kudos to your architects and engineers. That's a huge advantage.
We're an infra company. I mean, we kind of have to be. Yeah, we've made enough mistakes on it early on that we're really, like we care deeply now about making the right decisions for infra.
With our customers, we have seen in some cases customers do have an affinity towards one cloud for many, many reasons, right? Sometimes they have a very good deal with the cloud, which they don't have with the other cloud. Was there any resistance anywhere that I don't want to use AWS?
Definitely. I think it's actually less about costs. We've heard a mix of things.
I was just putting the cost as one reason that we can discuss.
I think probably the number one reason is we already use X, so that's what we want it to run on. I think when you dig into it, it's like that's what's security approved. And then we're like, okay, well, does your security team not approve of AWS? Because that would be really shocking. And then you dig into it and it's like, oh, it's actually for simplicity. We are actually okay running this on another cloud. I think the important piece here is they want to know that it's secure and they want to know that there's a way to really easily connect it to whatever other infrastructure they're using. So do people prefer to run on their own cloud, whatever they're using? Absolutely. But is it a hump you can't get over if your service is providing a lot of value? I don't think so. We haven't really run into that one.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And on AWS, I'm assuming you're using EKS.
EKS. Yeah.
Now coming back to the architecture choices, right? If you were to do this again, what is one thing that you will never do when you start your next company?
Oh God. I think there's quite a bit, but like candidly, I do think we would not just go in thinking this is always going to be a cloud multi-tenant product. I know that's really relevant to right now, but I think there's some decisions you can make early on. Notably, everything's done in Terraform. You almost never log into the AWS console. You try to make sure there's little drift. Don't bind yourself to AWS, primitives or services. Really try to be flexible because it opens you up later to really big deals. I think all that being said, if you're not going to be selling to enterprises, then don't do that. Like optimize for speed, efficiency, getting things off the ground. Run on Heroku if you want to.
On-prem after product market fit or on-prem before product market fit?
On-prem years after product market fit, but the thought that we might need to offer on-prem from day one.
Now, if you had AI the way we have AI today, right? So would it have simplified anything for you?
I mean, yeah. Absolutely.
The on-prem transition.
Yeah. What's really funny too, even everyone says you should be using microservices, but if you're a startup, it's pretty good actually to use a macro service or a monolith, just because you can move more quickly. And then, eventually you split out into microservices. But now with AI, it actually makes developing microservices really easy because it can maintain context across all your code bases and whatever. But actually AI is kind of worse at working on microservices, better at a monolith. So it's created this weird conundrum, but overall, look, we would probably be much more microservice heavy, which would build much more reliable services. I think we would think of those as again, not bound to AWS as much. The communication between them would be using generic services. I think we would have been much more ready for that. And candidly, we would have made different product decisions. A lot of decisions we made early on were, how can we write our code in an optimized way so that in the future, we don't have to write as much code. We can make things more configuration based. We can launch more, and I think ultimately now code is the cheapest thing you can do.
Exactly.
And so we're we wish that everything were just let AI go run on this and just custom code it.
Yeah. As code is easy. Debugging is probably the most expensive thing now.
Exactly. Yeah. And we built a whole system that is basically how can we build and launch new integrations without having to do much code, heavily config based, all that, which at the time was such a competitive advantage and now is, a bit of a ball and chain.
Gil, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for sharing that idea. I think one on-premise is such a difficult problem and you kind of broke it down into small pieces that people can learn and implement.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure being here. As we know, as AI gets more advanced, for some reason, we are getting less advanced and moving back to on-prem. So, yeah, really appreciate the chance to talk about it today. And yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.